Hello, my name is Kevin MacDonald, and I'm a professor in crops science in the School of Agriculture and Food Science in University College Dublin. Agriculture and forestry is one of the 4 subjects at University College Dublin that's ranked in the top 50 in the world. The agriculture, food and agribusiness sector is Ireland's largest indigenous industry and is critical to the Irish economy. And to support that, we've recently launched a new programme specialising in crop science. This new programme in crop science will address the skills shortage in this sector as identified by the industry and the Department of Agriculture. And this will be enabling the tillage sector to expand over the next decade to deal with the growth opportunities in areas such as the increasing demand for barley and malt for the rapidly expanding sector in the whisky and the microbrewing sectors. There's an increased demand for crops such as oats due to their nutrition and health benefits, and that's going to drive the requirement for higher value-added tillage crops. In addition to that, there are opportunities in the production of native protein for both the human and the animal requirement markets, as well as using specialized oil crops for the development of designer oil production, such as edible oils or industrial oils for both the plastics and polymers industry, as well as the printing sector. So the production of these crops to help support this sector and in the utilization of these crops within the sector will require graduates with a higher degree of agronomic management and supply chain management to ensure that these products can meet the premium markets for which they're destined. And this new crops program is designed to address these areas. Together with my colleague, Dr. Gary Gillespie from Crop Science, we're going to work through a number of crop experiments for you. We're going to start with looking at plant uniformity from certified versus non-certified seed. We'll also look at the effect of weather and soil conditions on the germination of seed. And then we look at the establishment of a number of different types of crops to see these differences in the crops and in their growth performance characteristics.
Okay, so we're currently here in the glass house, one of the glass houses in Lyons Estate, which is the research farm for UCD. It's currently 23 degrees inside the glass house and about 9 degrees outside. And we're going to look at some of the germination experiments. So here we have 2 soil types. We have a drier, finer soil here, and then we have a wet, heavier soil in these pots. And we're going to sow a number of crops into each soil type. So to start with, we have a non-certified barley seed here. This was taken from some of the trials here in UCD from last year. We also have a certified barley seed. We have some beans, I believe they're fanfare beans. We have some oilseed rapeseed. We have some husky oats. We have a few tomato seeds in there as well, and we will have some maize seeds. I don't have them to hand, but we will get them. So we're going to sow a number, or those crops into each of the pots. So we'll sow some into the drier soil, some into the wetter soil, and then we have 2 batches of each. We have another wet set there and another dry set down there. And those 2 sets will be placed outside of the greenhouse or the glass house once they're sown, and these ones up here on the table will remain inside the glass house, and that will then show us what sort of effect that different weather conditions will have on the germination rate and thus the growth of the crops that we're looking at. So the germination of the crops, it's pretty much sort of a vital ingredient, because at sowing time we're determining the potential yield we can get from each of our crops. So if we sow them into better soil conditions with better weather, we should end up with a higher yielding crop than if the crop was established in a wet soil, heavier soil, and we got poorer weather conditions. So to simulate those 2 things, we've got inside the glass house and outside the glass house, and we have a drier soil and a wetter soil, and a variety of crops to have a look at. So I'm going to sow these up and I will return once that's finished. Okay, that's all the pots sown up now. We've got This batch that's inside, it's a mixture of the wetter soil and the drier soil. And then outside we have the same, we have a wet soil and a dry soil. And we will check back on these in a few days and see if anything has happened. Grand. I should also say these pots that are in the greenhouse will be getting watered fairly frequently, whereas the pots that we have outside, they'll just be left to whatever it is that nature throws at them. So these are the inside pots. They were sown on the Friday, the 26th of February. It's currently Monday, the 1st of March. And as you can see, there's still no sign of any seedlings emerging just yet. What we can notice is that the dry soil that the pots were sown in has gotten very dry, whereas the wet soil that was potted in is still quite wet. So even though it's been sunny over the weekend, there's still very low rates of evapotranspiration, meaning that those wet pots are still quite wet. So we'll check back again on these in another few days. We'll check on the outside pots as well and just see how they're doing too. So as expected, the outside plots, or pots even, also have no sign of any seedlings emerged, but as we didn't see any inside, I wasn't exactly expecting to see any at this rate in the outside pots either. So again, leave these for another few days and we'll check back. Good morning everyone, we're back here in the glasshouse in Lyons Estate just to take a look at our pots. So it's been 10 days since these were sown and we're starting to get some germination. You can see some here. Interestingly, the ones that are furthest ahead are actually the non-certified barley seeds and the ones that were sown in the wet soil rather than the dry soil, which is a bit interesting. It's not 100% germination. There's a few missing from this pot here. But then as these pots were sown by hand, there may be slight variations in the sowing depth of some of the seed. And these are the certified barley, and you can see there is some starting to germinate with one here, here, and a few down here. So we'll keep an eye on them and see how they're germinating. We've also got one of the oats just starting to germinate here. Still no sign of any of the tomatoes or the maize or oilseed rape at the minute, but we'll keep an eye on them and see how they go over the next couple of days. Everything should start appearing in the next few days or so. So if we look at the outside pots now, again we've got still very little germination to see in any of these pots. Definitely nothing in the tomatoes, maize, oilseed rape. If anything, there's some of the beans look like they might be the first to come on, but nothing yet. But potentially an oat just there as well. But we'll keep an eye on them again and see how they're getting on. So we'll check back in another day or two and see how things are progressing. Hi everyone, we're back here in the glasshouse in Lyons again. It is currently 17 days since these pots were sown. And as you can see clearly the barley pots are racing on ahead. Doesn't look to be much difference between the certified seed and the non-certified seed. But the soil that was slightly wetter at sowing is doing better than the dry soil. And after the barley, we do have some oats appearing here as well. They will be the next best germinating after the barley. Back here we have just a few beans just starting to poke their heads through here as well. Still no sign of any maize sticking set up. A few weeds present there, but no maize. We've one tomato and very little oilseed rape. There's a little bit here and another one over there. So if we take a look at the outside pots then as well and just see how they're doing. Okay, so looking at the outside pots here now, you can see there's much less growth in comparison. Again, the first of the pots to start though is the barley, just a little bit starting in some of the pots. There's more back here. And there's one or two oats just poking through, but again, no sign of any oilseed rape, tomatoes or maize. There is one or two beans just barely starting to chit through the seed as well here, so hopefully they'll be up in the next couple of days as well. So we'll leave these growing on for another bit longer. We'll check back on them again in a few days and see how they're going. Hello everyone, we're back in the glass house again to check on our pot and germination experiment. As you can see, things are really starting to get growing now. So still our barley is furthest ahead, but the beans are starting to grow as well. And we're really starting to see some differences between the wet and the dry soil. So this pot back here was beans sown into the wetter soil, whereas this one is beans sown into a drier soil. So really starting to see the effect of both weather with these pots compared to the outside pots and the soil conditions, such as the wet and the dry soil here. And we're also starting to see a few of the maize seedlings starting to appear as well. So we'll keep growing these for another while and see what happens. So looking at the outdoor pots now, as you can see, there's a very marked difference between the indoor pots and the outdoor pots. So we're really starting to see the effects of weather on germination and growth, with some more minor differences in between the wet and the dry soils compared to the weather effects. These are much more minor. You can see we do have some beans germinating. There's a couple back there as well. We've got some barley here and here. Still no sign of any maize or tomatoes outside. And we've got some small areas of oats germinating here as well. So like the indoor ones, we'll just keep an eye on them and we'll see what happens. So it has been 4 weeks since we started the germination experiment in these pots. This will be the last day we record any information on that. So we're going to give these plants some fertilizer now. So we're going to get an application of 18612. Everything except the beans is going to get that. And then we will grow these pots on and use them in the experiment to look at the dry matter content of different crops. So there'll be less updates then on these pots for the next while. We'll just keep giving them, the indoor pots anyway, we'll keep giving them water as needs be. We'll grow them on, and then in another maybe 2 weeks or so, we'll check back in, see how they're growing, and then we'll conduct the experiment to determine the dry matter content of the various crops. Hello everyone, we are not down in the greenhouse today, we're back in the office to take a look at some of the results from the germination experiments that we conducted. So we'll just start with a quick overview. So these experiments were for strand 3 related to crops, and the 3 that we were looking at so far were 3.3.1, and then part C, investigate the effect of weather and soil conditions. Part D, to compare plant uniformity from certified and uncertified seed. And Part E, to compare the establishment for grass with that of one other crop. We didn't actually use grass in this, we used multiple different tillage crops, as we didn't have time to establish the grass in it. Anyway, so we'll just sum up the materials and methods that we used. So in this experiment, we used a range of pots. We used 2 litre, you could use larger. And if you wanted it, you could also sow these into the ground as well. You'll need an assortment of seeds, the ones that we used. If you want to redo this trial, we used 2 barleys, the certified and the non-certified seed. We had the beans, the oats, the oilseed rape, and then we also had tomato and maize. You're also going to need soil, preferably 2 or more types of contrasting sand and clay contents. And you also need sort of a wet or a dry soil. We had similar soil types, but they were wet and dry for comparison here. And then for our experiment, the nearest Met Air and Synoptic station we had is Casement Airdrum, if you want to look for that on met.ie. And the sowing date we had was the 26th of February, and we ended this version of the trial on the 26th of March, so just a month of growing. Okay, so we'll just take a quick look at the weather conditions that occurred during the trial. These are taken from the Casement Airdrum that I mentioned. So on the x-axis, like pretty much every graph in this, is days since sowing. So 0 is when we sowed, and 30 is when we ended the trial, the last day we took measurements. So as you can see there on the top bit in blue, the rainfall, very little rainfall over this entire experiment. We had no rainfall for the first 10 days, and then the majority of the rainfall occurred then at about over the 12th, 13th, and 14th day of the experiments. Again, similarly, the first 10 or so days of the experiment, we had quite low temperatures, with a number of days where the minimum temperature was below 0 or freezing, and the average temperature was quite low, in and around 3 or so degrees. After about 10 or 12 days, it did start to warm up a bit, and you'll see that that's when the warmer temperatures combined with the rainfall and then led on to the germination of some of the outdoor pots that we were looking at. And then the bottom bit is just the sunshine hours we have. You can see it's quite a bright, sunny period for the experiment, except for those 3 or so days in the middle where we got quite a substantial amount of rain. But if you want to check that out in more detail, it is available on the met.ie website. Okay. Okay, so if we look at the effect of the soil and the weather first, so here we have, this is the sum of all of the crops that we used in each of the situations. So for the red line, which is the wet soil indoors, that's just a sum of every seedling across the 7 crops we used in that wet soil indoors. So from this graph, you can see that both of the indoor pots in the red and the yellow lines germinated much quicker than the outdoor pots, the blue and the green line. In both situations as well, the wet soils germinated quicker than the dry soils for both the inside and the outside pots. So that would then suggest that we need both warm weather for being indoors, combined with enough moisture in the pots to allow for the seeds to imbibe water, break dormancy, and thus germinate. And our indoor pots germinated after approximately 10 days, on average about 10 days. And the outdoor pots were a bit later at about 16 days for germination there. You can also see that we did achieve much higher rates of germination indoors compared to outdoors. And we'll look at that in further detail in some of the other graphs as well. So just some of the key points then from the effect of soil and weather combined. So the indoor pots germinated on average 6 days earlier than the outdoor pots. And as I mentioned, these were the rates of germination that we saw as well, with the indoor being higher than the outdoor, would be important for the likes of seed or sowing rate calculations to ensure that we get the correct plant stand populations to achieve as high a yield as possible for whichever crop we are looking at for a particular field. And the time of germination then would also be important for weed management. So in conventional systems, if we're applying a pre-emergence herbicide, then we want to know roughly when our crops are going to emerge so we don't kill them off. Or if we're in an organic system, we may be doing some sort of flame weeding where we burn off the weeds before the crop germinates to remove the competition aspect and allow our crops to get the best possible start. So by knowing the time it'll take for germination will allow us to more accurately apply these weed management systems. Okay, so if we just look at the soil now, so here we have the two soils. We have the blue line is wet soil and the red line is dry soil. So, and these are combined again between the both indoor and outdoor pots. In the wet soil are combined for the blue line, and the indoor and outdoor pots are combined to make the dry soil line here. So you can see that the wet soil germinated about 2 days quicker than the dry soil. As we mentioned, is probably due to seeds having more moisture available to allow them to break their dormancy and start germination. But then we can also see that the wet soil allowed for a higher rate of germination across all of the crops as well. But then there will be a bit of a grey line also between what's wet enough to ensure germination, but too wet that will cause issues surrounding soil compaction. So there's further work needs to be done on that, and some of the trials we are conducting in UCD are looking at the yield of its spring barley we're looking at with two different soil moisture levels for sowing to see the effect of these soil compaction on yield and germination effects. And so, as I said, the wetter soils outperform the drier soils, and this is possibly due to increased seed imbibition, which is the uptake of water by the seeds. And then if we just look at the indoors and the outdoors, as you can see, there's a significant difference here between the amount of seeds that germinated indoors compared with outdoors. So indoors, they germinated after approximately, or started germination after approximately 9 days, whereas outdoors took about 16 days. And if you look back to the weather graphs that we showed in one of the earlier slides, you'll see that the outdoor germination lines up quite nicely with the rainfall that occurred and the slightly warmer temperatures. So the outdoor seeds are about half the amount of germination compared to the indoor seeds. So we've got significant differences there when we're looking at the effect of just the weather on the germination of seeds. Okay, so if we move on now, we look at the barley we grew. So this is the certified and the non-certified barley we see. So in this graph, the dashed lines represent non-certified seed and the solid lines represent certified seed. So again, compared to some of the other graphs we have, the wet soil indoors germinated the quickest at about 9 days. The dry soil indoors was then at the next one to germinate after about 11 days. And then the outdoor seeds were a good bit later at about 16 days, and with the dry soil outdoors even later at about 18 or 19 days. So as we can see in this graph, there's very little difference between the certified and the non-certified seeds when they were grown indoors. So when they're grown in the glass house, we see similar levels of germination between certified and non-certified. That would be the orange and the red lines compared with the sort of darker grey lines. But then when we move to look at the outdoor pots, which is the blue and green lines and the purple and pink lines, we can see that the certified seed did quite a bit better, particularly the green line, so the wet soil outside did an awful lot better compared to the dry soil outside, which is the dashed purple line. So then this would suggest that in ideal weather conditions, you could get away with using non-certified seed. However, we're very unlikely to get ideal conditions, and the outdoor pots, which would be similar to what farmers would be sowing into in a typical year, would suggest that the certified seed is the way to go and would ensure correct plant stand populations, and would allow us to save money also by having ultimately a higher yield through this certified seed. So again, just the key points between the certified and non-certified. So little difference between the two when they're grown indoors in a much warmer condition and with ideal amounts of moisture. But then when they're moved outdoors, certified seed performs better, suggesting that poorer weather conditions would require certified seed. And in this situation, poorer weather conditions is compared to the glass house. But the poorer weather conditions we saw will be typical of what farmers will be sowing into in a field anyway. So yeah, would suggest that certified seed does help farmers achieve better yields and germination rates. And again, we saw that the indoor seeds germinated quicker than the outdoor seeds, and the wet soils germinated earlier than the dry soils. Okay, so now if we take a look at part E to compare the establishments. So here we have the sum of all of the crops. So we've the four situations, the indoors and the outdoors, the dry soil and the wet soil, all summed together by crop. And from this, we can see that the non-certified barley, the blue, germinated quicker earliest, but then when the outdoor soil started to add into this situation, the certified seeds performed better. And next we have the oats here in the light blue color. They were the next crop to germinate, but had relatively average amounts of germination rate. Our oilseed rape in the black line, we had quite poor establishment conditions for. We had very good conditions for the beans, which germinated a bit later than the barley and the oats, but then they were also planted or sown deeper into the soil. So there's that to take into account there. But the certified barley and the certified bean seed are the two highest germinations. And then the tender crops that we grew, just for comparison, was the tomato in the red line and the maize in the sort of yellowy orange line. And we got very, very poor levels of germination from the tomato. We only got 2 seedlings in total. Whereas maize, as we see, it germinated significantly later, about 10 days later than the barley and the oats. We got only okay sowing condition or germination rates for that. We only got about 9 seedlings in total for the maize. But then maize will be sown a lot later, be sown sort of mid-April maybe, particularly in the south of the country for maize, whereas we attempted to sow it outdoors in February. So we weren't expecting any germination from maize in the outdoor plots, but just to highlight that weather conditions have a significant impact on the germination of a crop, and that the weather conditions need to be suitable for each crop. So we could get away with sowing our barley an awful lot earlier than we can get away with sowing our maize. And then if we just take a look at the overall situation, so here we have our crops. They're the same colors as they were in the last graph, and we have it broken down into each of the scenarios we had. So on top in A, we have dry soil indoors, then we have our dry soil outdoors, and then our wet soil indoors and our wet soil outdoors here on the bottom. So as you can see, as we mentioned, our wet soil indoors was the earliest to germinate, approximately 9 days for our barley. Then came our dry soil indoors, which took about 11 days. And then our wet soil outdoors, allowing for a bit of the seed to imbibe some water. From the wet soil, it germinated next after about 16 days. And then our dry soil outdoors was the last to grow. The dashed line, gray line in these is also the maximum amount of seeds that can germinate. So you can see the outdoor soils, we didn't get maximum germination for any of the crops that we sowed, but we did hit maximum germination for a number of the crops in the indoor situations. But it really highlights the difference we can see between the weather effects and the soil effects on each of the crops. So the non-certified barley in the indoor situations in figure A and C, we got maximum germination, whereas we compare that to B with the dry soil outdoors, we got very, very poor levels of germination for the non-certified seed in that situation. We can also see that the majority of our oilseed rape was accumulated from the wet soil indoors scenario. Whereas in contrast to this, the majority of the maize seedlings we saw germinated was from the dry soil indoors. Okay, so then some of the key points from the comparison of crop establishments. Again, both the certified and non-certified barley performed the best in the early stages of the trials. The beans emerged approximately 4 days after the barley, but caught up after about 25 days and ultimately performed better than the non-certified barley. Whereas the, we're calling them tender crops of tomato and maize were the worst performing crops in these trials. And this was to be expected due to the very early planting date of the 26th of February and the colder temperatures than these crops can tolerate. And this resulted in the very poor germination levels that we saw. And as we mentioned, the oats had only reasonable germination levels, with emergence occurring approximately 3 days after the barley crop. So that is our summary of the results from the germination experiment we have. If you have any questions on the experiment, do get in contact with us. We're more than happy to answer any questions. And if you'd like to follow us on Twitter to keep up to date with any of our ongoing research surrounding crops and cropping systems, there's a number of Twitter handles you can follow there. Also, we have an ongoing tillage survey at the moment. So if you are from a farm that grows crops, we would really appreciate if you could help us out by getting either a parent or a guardian or uncle, cousin, neighbor, friend, anyone you know that grows crops to complete our survey. And if you are one of the people that have completed our survey, we really appreciate the time you took to complete the survey. So if you do wish to take part in the survey, you can either use a smartphone or a tablet to scan the QR code below. Or if you don't have a QR code reader, you can visit www.bit.ly/UCD-AgTech. And then finally, if any of you are looking for more information on UCD's new crop science degree, then information is available at the link listed there below. Okay, so that is all we have. Yeah, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, get in contact. We're more than happy to answer the questions. Best of luck with your exams, and hopefully we will see some of you in UCD come September time. Thank you.